We are your home theater and AV questions answered. This is AVRant. Want your home theater or AV question answered by Tom and Rob? Send it to question@avrant.com. Welcome to another edition of AV Rant. I'm Tom Andrew, and I'm here with
Rob H. This is AV Rant. It's your home theater and AV questions answered. And what movie are we reviewing this week, Tom? We've started a trend here in 2022. So I know you tweeted out something. You tweeted out movie review.
My wife and I have been talking about watching Parasite for a really long time.
Yep.
And it's Korean language, so it's subtitles and stuff like that, which don't bother me usually, but we tend to watch movies a little bit later at night, and she tends to fall asleep. Okay. So I was not interested in starting a movie like that and then having her fall asleep and all that. But so this weekend, we started the movie fairly early. We had to go get a child from his work, who cannot drive. So we had to go pick him up. And so we had enough time in between, so I knew nobody was falling asleep. So we started it, and it was quite good. I will be honest, it is listed under the comedy section.
Yeah, there's definitely humor in it, particularly the beginning and middle is definitely
the beginning and middle. Funny. Yes, yeah. It would not. If you had asked me what kind of movie that was, comedy would not have been the first thing that came to my mind.
Overall, wouldn't classify it as a comedy. Well, that's a bit like
it's definitely a very, very dark comedy.
Right,
it's a comedy. My wife was very dismayed that she's like, there's no protagonists in here. I'm like, yeah, that's right. There's nobody's the good guy. There's only bad people.
Good guy. I mean, there's a protagonist in the sense of,
right.
the character driving the plot forward.
Yes.
But yeah, no, not. I would. Yeah, there's
Excellent
no good
movie.
guy.
Very rarely do I see, because that won the Oscar, right?
It sure
Best
did.
Picture.
Yes.
Very rarely have I enjoyed an Oscar-winning Best Picture movie as much as I've enjoyed that one. Usually, I get to the end of it, I'm like, well, technically, it was a good movie. Mm-hmm. I will never watch it again, like ever.
Well,
like, you couldn't pay me to sit down and watch it again.
No disagreement this week. Then we both like Parasite. Your wife also likes Parasite, so there we go. We are not in disagreement anymore. We found our common ground. I will recommend definitely Don't Look Up on Netflix. I don't know if you've watched that
I haven't had a chance to see that yet. It's on my to-do list. There's a lot of things I'm trying to watch right now.
Right.
Just in preparation for me getting so mad at Netflix that I cancel them because of the price hikes and everything else that's been going on.
Before your price goes up.
I'm trying to get Shadow and Bone, and I already lowered our tier.
Okay.
Because it's ridiculous that I'm paying extra so I can get Atmos, and I can't get Atmos.
Yeah.
Because of and I don't need multiple streams. So if my kids are like, how come it doesn't work on my phone? I'm like, first of all, it shouldn't have been on your phone. Second of all, I don't care. It works.
Two other people are already using it. That's why it doesn't work for them anymore. But yes, Don't Look Up is meant to be satire. I'm very saddened that it's very difficult to satirize anything these days, and it's perhaps all too believable that it wasn't really satire, and that might be exactly how it would play out in that scenario. And also, I'm exceedingly dismayed at all the people making comments on Ariana Grande's various social media because she put out the song for that movie, which I think is maybe up for an Oscar. I don't know if it was the
movie or the song.
The song.
Oh, okay.
But it is also a parody song, and it is maybe the comedy highlight of the whole movie. Like they place it perfectly in the movie, and it's laugh out loud funny. But most people online don't seem to get that it's a parody song.
These are probably the same people that were really upset when is it Michael, the guy who played Killmonger? What's the actor's name?
Yes,
Michael B. Jordan. Is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah, when he was the human, they cast him as the Human Torch, and everybody lost their. It's the same group of people. That's the same group of people that absolutely have no sense
context,
of humor. Context,
lyrical awareness.
Can you imagine if they cast? You could cast Michael B. Jordan as as Franklin Richards right now, and everybody would be
Mhm.
like, I'm in. Because he is such a fantastic actor. But at the time, they were like, who is this guy? He's just the wrong color. And then they lost their minds. So you could cast him as Doctor Strange or be like, yeah, okay, that's good. Yeah, I'll take it.
Except he's pretty recognizable in the MCU as Killmonger now, so he might have to go over and play a DC character.
No one cares.
No one cares. They've used the same actor for multiple roles already.
Multiple roles.
Yeah.
They've already done that. That's not even...
Gemma Chan, who played Cersei, she was also somebody else in the MCU before, so
yeah,
I can't remember her other character. Wasn't as large a role, but there we go.
Obviously.
Mm-hmm. Okay, that's movies. We're done
we agree on the movie. I don't know what movie we're going to watch this week, Rob, but we're going to both.
I don't know.
Whatever. I also watched Logan with my wife.
Okay.
She's been on this movie watching kick, and she went through and she's like, "What about this movie Logan?" I'm like, I'm sorry, did you say Logan? And she's like, yeah, Logan. We should watch Logan. I'm like, it's an X-Men movie. She goes, yeah. I know. I read the thing. I'm like, it's about Wolverine. And she's like, yeah, I know. I saw it. I'm like, well, I own it on 4K Ultra HD. Let's watch it. I'm like, yeah, I'm totally down. And she enjoyed it. She's like, it's not like a superhero movie.
It is not. It is not typical at all.
It is not.
Very good.
And it is fantastic. So she enjoyed it. I enjoyed watching it again, and it solidified in my mind that my projector bulb was absolutely needed to be replaced.
Right.
Because I got halfway through that movie, I was just like waiting for her to go to the bathroom. Because the minute she went to the bathroom, I went back into the menu settings and put the bulb in like torch mode. I was like, I cannot see anything in this movie. Everything's too dark. So I had to order a new bulb, which came in like 3 days.
Good.
I'm so happy. Now everything's back.
Perfect.
So. All right, let's AVRant Podcast. We answer your questions on AV and home theater. So to get your question answered, all you have to do is ask by emailing us at question@avrant.com. Go to avrant.com and see our podcast episodes, 700 and I guess this one will be 92 so far. You can find them over there. You can also go to facebook.com/AVRant Podcast. Interact with us, youtube.com/avrant. Contact us directly, rob@avrant.com. His Twitter is @firstreflect. I'm Tom @avrant.com. My Twitter is @avrant_Tom. We want to thank our listeners of the week. To become a listener of the week, support the podcast. Lots of ways to do that. One of the ways you can do it is going to our website and clicking on the Buy Us a Cup of Coffee link. That will send you to a PayPal donation pop-up or site or something. I don't know what it does. I never clicked on that. Anywho. So Gav did that this week, and we want to thank Gav. So thank you very much, Gav.
Yes, indeed, Gav. Thank you very much for the PayPal donation. We definitely appreciate the financial support.
I'm sorry. If Gav is not from Australia, I feel like
he is. That's even highlighted a little bit lower down.
Is it really? Okay, good. Because Gav, that is what somebody in Australia would call somebody.
Good call.
It has to be. We also want to thank our 136 patrons over at patreon.com. Patreon.com/AVRant Podcast, where you can sign up to be a monthly contributor to our podcast. Every month I'll take some money from you and give most of it to us. We have 136 patrons, including Bertrand, who reminded us that he has been supporting us for quite some time. So thank you very much, Bertrand.
That's right. Yeah, thanks very much to all our 136 patrons, including Bertrand, over at patreon.com/AVRant Podcast. You can think of it like a voluntary subscription, if you please. So that's a great way to support us financially. And big thanks to all our patron support.
Yes, and I'm going to add somebody to this list in just a second here, as I'm waiting for it to pop up. So, yes, I want to thank Todd. Todd is a member of our listening community. He actually posted over at Reddit/home theater or something, one of the Reddit subreddits, one of my articles, thinking that it would be enjoyable for the people over there. They did not enjoy it, and he got banned.
He got banned?
He got banned. That's what he says. He says, it didn't go well, and I got myself banned in the process. Keep up the great podcast from a longtime Patreon supporter. So, Todd, I don't know what is wrong with the people over at Reddit. They should know I post there. I do it quite often, even though I occasionally get somebody who just... And I'm unwilling to argue with people. So I'll say something, and they'll be like, that's not true. I'm like, okay, I guess it's not, because the internet guy yelled at me. So I'm so thank you, Todd. I am sorry they banned you over there. They are terrible people, apparently, and I I'm about to write an article based on this, but called "Home Theater Doesn't Need Any More Gatekeepers," because that's exactly what this is. So thank you, Todd, for supporting AV Gadgets and supporting the AVRant podcast.
Yeah, thanks, Todd, for being a patron. That's where we're including this in the list. And yeah, crazy that posting a link to something would get you banned, but who knows? I don't know. They Reddit
probably thought it was me trying in a
right,
like trying to do some self-promotion. I'm like, I've never linked any of my own articles, so I'm not about to start now. Whatever, dude. I swear, people on the internet are so angry. Just so. If you could take like one construct and say this is what fuels the Hulk, it would be the internet. Internet is like society's rage funneled into a digital form, and if you could, and then that is what makes Hulk. That just feeds into Hulk and makes him big. That's what it is. That's what I think. We also got.
I'm always angry. I'm on
some
the internet.
Other support. That's right. If you can't support us financially, we understand. But if you have something you can do it, and either do it to us so that we know what it is, or tell us about it, and we will mention it. So JT sent a Movies Anywhere code to Rob and myself. I think I can use it, but Rob can't for a movie. So thank you very much, JT.
Yeah, thanks, JT. That was very nice to send that code.
And we got some notes of gratitude for keeping the podcast going through the ever progressing, I don't know what we even call it. I don't know how it's going anymore. Pandemic from Brandon. 2A. JR. What, 2E? Is that what it is? 2A. 2A.
At least that's how I know how to pronounce it. I might be wrong, easily.
Oh, I don't know. He's a S away from being a abbreviation for Tuesday, so I don't know. 2A. So Brandon 2A, JR says our suggestions for using the 2-speaker presets on his Denon so that he could experiment with different configurations turned out very well. Bi-amping was a bust, but full range fronts for music sounded nice in the setup for his musical tastes. So there you go. Aras, is that what we're saying for this one? Aras?
I think so, yeah.
Aras says he's watching every episode and really appreciates that he can keep learning new things about home theater even when, at one point, he thought there wasn't anything left to learn. So that's never a good place to be. As somebody who routinely Googles things because I am unsure of how things work, and has been doing this for a very long time. If you think you've learned everything about home theater, and I don't even consider myself to be that much of an expert. I know how ignorant I am about a lot of these things. I ask Rob every week. I'm like, dude, how does this work again? Hit him up on the text message. Rob, does that thing work again? We say this all the time, and I believe it's right. But what is it? How does it work? Gurinder really understood Julian's pain when we shared his story about house guests that left his projector running with the lens cap on. He had house guests who, it turned out, wanted to plug their laptop into his projector, but didn't realize they should have plugged it into the AV receiver. They bent the bracket that was holding an acoustic panel on his back wall when they tried to climb up to the back of the projector, and they yanked the power cord when they lost the remote and couldn't figure out how to turn it off.
Yes. House guests, just
never invited over.
Really
again.
Convincing me what a great idea that would be.
Yeah. Bertrand, Brad, Gav, and Canberra, that's definitely in Australia. Justin says he's listened for an absurd number of years. Our weekly show is like going to church now, a weird idiosyncratic church. Well, yeah. So I guess that's fun. Church or home theater.
Yep.
Brandon, 2A, JR, Aras, Gurinder, Bertrand, Brad, Gav, and Justin. Thank you very much for thanking us.
I shall say the names one more time. Brandon, 2A, JR, Aras, Gurinder, Bertrand, Brad, Gav, and Justin. Thank you all very much for those notes of gratitude. The notes of encouragement are definitely greatly appreciated. So a big thank you to everybody who continues to listen and send in your questions.
In the news, AV Nirvana got the scoop on some more details about the forthcoming SVS 3000 in-wall subs. According to their report, it will use 2 9-inch drivers, not the smaller 8-inch drivers found in the 3000 Micro. Those dual 9-inch drivers will be in a sealed cabinet made of MDF and aluminum, designed to fit in a standard wall stud bay. And the 800-watt amp, 2500 watts peak, will be a separate rack-mountable chassis, which is very typical for in-wall subs, with controls on the front panel, plus it works with the SVS app. You'll also have the option of connecting 2 of the driver units, that would be 4 9-inch drivers in total, to a single amp. The 3000 in-wall is supposed to start shipping in June for $1,300 or $2,000 for 1 amp with 2 driver units. So dual subs, 1 amp. This is all very typical for in-wall subs. Most times the amps can run more than 1 sub. The amps are almost always, I cannot even think of an example where they were inside the wall with the
like
stuff.
actually built into the drivers. Yeah,
it's almost never the case. There's no space, number one. Number two, you don't want there. It's like the last place you want it to be. So this is all very, very typical. The 9-inch drivers gives it a little bit more surface area than the 8-inch drivers, probably trying to hit that same spec. And knowing SVS, that these are not just off-the-shelf 9-inch drivers.
Nope, I'm sure not.
Themselves. Been testing them for a long time. So, if you're in, $2,000 for dual subs isn't that bad to begin with.
It's not that bad. Yeah, when you look at other in-wall sub options, and then, assuming, because we don't know yet, we don't have the measurements yet, but assuming that it is pretty darn close to a 3000 micro, which there's not much reason to think that it wouldn't be. The internal volume that should be available should be pretty darn close. As they pointed out, they made the surface area just a little bit larger. So maybe these don't quite dig completely flat straight down to 20 hertz, but it's going to be 25, 23, something pretty close to that. So if you look at other in-wall subwoofer alternatives, most of them are more expensive than this to get performance anywhere near that.
$2,000 is not unreasonable to think to pay for a single in-wall subwoofer.
That's right.
Not duals. So
I'm reasonably excited about this. I think this could be I definitely think this will be successful if the performance is there. I have no doubt about that.
Right. I am never, ever going to be excited about recommending an in-wall subwoofer, ever. That is never going to be my go-to. That's never going to happen. So don't anybody think that SVS is suddenly going to convert me with their in-wall subs. I don't care if they could be $100 a pop. I still wouldn't recommend them. But it's nice to have a more the last time I saw a really decent looking in-wall subs, it was like a THX model, and it was insanely expensive. And it was also like you had to have a big room because it filled up the entire bay. It was like, oh, your room has to be at least 8 feet tall. I'm like, really? I'm like, oh well.
But
either that or six up into the attic.
Picture something like, maybe you've got a setup where even a 3000 micro, like you've got a 3000 micro at one side of your room, and then you don't even have room for that, so you got one of these in walls on the other side of the room. Like, I feel pretty confident that this is going to line up with the 3000 micro pretty darn closely. So I'm envisioning where this could definitely be a solution for some setups. That's
for sure. All these new constructions are people who are like, I'm building my basement and I want it to be completely clean look, and it's going to be a rectangular room. Can I just put 2 of these in opposite corners or in the midpoint of walls or what? And we're going to say yes. We're going to say yes. You can reasonably expect your performance to be pretty good. It has to be the right size room, and there's other things to consider. But for $2,000, that's a very reasonable price for this. What we expect this performance to be. Microsoft has agreed to buy Activision Blizzard after, they completely ran their stock into the ground through all the sex allegations and abuse allegations and people boycotting and if you haven't read anything about what's been going on at Activision Blizzard in the last couple of years, don't, because any faith you had left in humanity is just going to be like, really? There's still places like this? It exactly feels like the Wolf of Wall Street, that kind of boys club.
Board of directors just refusing to do anything about it. They're like,
nope, we're not doing anything. We're making money.
They're still making money as long as the people up top here continue to earn value for our shareholders. Then no accountability for anything else they do. Is
Microsoft going to change that?
I mean,
We'll
the speculation is that, they're not gonna double up on their board of directors, so there might be a whole bunch of people cashing out, but that means they're cashing out at a valuation of $68.7 billion. So you want to talk about a golden parachute and being rewarded for your bad behavior. Yeah. Not a great look, but
no, it's not.
Yeah.
Anyways, it's basically turned Microsoft. I haven't even read what Rob's written here yet, but it's basically turned Microsoft into almost a monopoly on all the good games that exist.
They bought Bethesda not that long ago, so that was another giant
Don't they own
studio.
Valve too? I thought
they don't own Valve. No, Valve is their own thing.
They bought Halo from them or something? Is that
no? Halo was their own thing. That was
on there.
That was always
all right. So, anyways, Microsoft agreed to buy Activision Blizzard for $68.7 billion, which honestly is a deal compared to how much it was probably worth a couple of years ago. It's the largest amount paid for a game studio ever. It still needs to pass regulatory approval, but assuming that it does, Microsoft will own the studio behind Call of Duty, Warcraft, Overwatch, Candy Crush, and many other popular game franchises sometime in 2023. So if you ever really liked loot boxes, expect more of those. Phil Spector, head of Xbox, has already said they intend to keep Call of Duty multi-platform, and they will abide by all of Activision's existing agreements until they don't have to, once they take over ownership. They also intend to bring as many of Activision's titles as possible to Xbox Game Pass. And Xbox Game Pass, according to people who use such things, is actually a pretty good deal. Tell me
it is a good deal. It is in no way sustainable at the current price.
No.
Everything they are doing is about just trying to get that user base up, and they've reached 25 million subscribers now. But
get ready for the Netflix treatment.
Oh man,
start raising
100%. Because there's no way that they can continue to. So I mean, most of it is their first party stuff, and since they keep buying everybody, I guess But at some point, the revenue is not going to make sense. Just this ongoing subscription model for the number of games that are on there, and the studios and the budgets that have to be paid to make these games.
I would expect a tiered system to exist at some point in the very near future.
Sure. But I
wouldn't even be surprised if they were like, okay, you can have all those games for this price, but if you want any of the Activision Blizzard stuff, you need this. And then World of Warcraft is
it's going to be like how Stars is an add-on. There's going to be add-on things maybe, but who knows how that's actually going to go. But yes, definitely don't expect the price to remain where it is right now. But the other thing is, all the studios that Microsoft has bought, because they bought up oodles and oodles of studios over the past, it's really just over the past 4 years where they've just gobbled up a bunch of studios. And there's been hardly any games. Out of all those studios that they bought, there's been hardly any games released. It's almost as though once these companies get these giant billion-dollar paydays and Microsoft owns them now, they're like, all right, so what's the incentive to keep working super hard? Their payday already came and went. So yeah, I
don't know.
I don't know if this is really all that great. I haven't seen it pan out yet. They keep saying the games are coming, but I'm like, in that same amount of time, Sony's first party studios have put out 7 titles each, and we've gotten 1 or 0 from a lot of these Microsoft-owned ones. So I don't know what's going on over there, but we'll see how this all plays out.
I'm sure it's something terrible, whatever it is. I'm sure it's something that could be considered by many to be a crime against humanity, because that seems to be what's happening in the game industry right now. I am my kids are my boys are old enough, 2 of them at least, to start. One of them's going off to college next year, hopefully, and the second one in a couple of years he'll be off to college. So they're talking about careers and stuff, and I want to go into programming. I'm like, do you really though? Do you really want to go into I'm not saying that you can't make money programming, because you absolutely 100% can, but right now that's the industry that at least I see from my perspective as being one of the ones that has more abuse, one of the more abusive industries. Everybody that I know that works in programming is just like, you have to switch jobs a lot.
Yeah, there are always jobs available.
Right, but that's not necessarily indicative of a great job environment. It's kind of like there's always a job for teachers, and teachers are completely abused. So
or
I don't know,
anybody in healthcare, there's always jobs for nurses, and you can see why.
Got some comments from some of our listeners. Andrew, who's writing for me at AV Gadgets, he gives a shout out to Herb over at Cross Spectrum Labs. Andrew recently bought an Onkyo TX NR7100 because his Denon died, which includes DRAC. It comes with an inexpensive microphone for setup, but you also have the option of using a USB mic connected to your computer. So Rob urged Andrew to reach out to Herb about getting an individually calibrated U-Mic 1. Herb was super helpful. So a huge thank you to him and also to Rob for twisting his arm to get in touch with him. He also texted me. He was like, can I mention your name? I'm like, I don't care. He's like, well, you know your name has weight. I'm like, it really doesn't. It really doesn't.
I mean,
it doesn't.
It's not a secret. Andrew's name appears right in the byline on AV Gadgets. So if you wanted to mention that, just send a link. There you go.
Just
There's his name.
This is me, and Tom will back that up. I'm like, yeah, mention one. Nathan says, we mentioned how you could maybe use some standoffs to create your own air gap behind Acoustimac panels, since by default our panels mount flush to the wall, but the 2-inch thick panels that he got from Acoustimac have plywood on the back, so there wouldn't be much point to adding an air gap, just an FYI. I was just on the Acoustimac website looking at panels the other day, and I think you can choose, and I don't know if this is new or not, I think you can choose whether you wanted to have it wood-backed or no back.
So
now,
on the base traps, which is anything 4 inches or thicker, those have the option of back or no back. On
must have been what I was looking at.
DIY frames, what they call their DIY kits, which, like I say, I think they're more assembly required than truly DIY.
Right.
But what are listed as their DIY kits, you have the option of include a back panel or not.
I was definitely looking at that one as well.
And that's even on the 2-inch ones. But by default, if you just order the 2-inch panels, they still come with the plywood backing. That is the case, at least at the time of this recording. So I think Nathan probably got 2-inch thick panels. So those ones would have the plywood backing. And it isn't a thing where you could just easily remove it because the fabric has been wrapped around onto the...
to it, yeah.
So you would have to slice it and cut it out. It's very, very thin plywood on the back. It's not thick at all, so you could cut it if you really wanted to, but that's, of course, destructive.
A jigsaw and a couple and a steady hand will get you a hole back there. 2A would like to share an open source project he has started. He isn't a fan of how Sonos and other wireless speaker systems lock you into their ecosystem and break compatibility with older models via software updates. So he has started a project to create an open source Wi-Fi speaker called Storm.
No,
or Strom.
Strom.
Whatever. STRO with a line through it. M. Okay, Strom, which means both power and stream in Danish. There you go. Danish means both a language and a tasty pastry.
Yes, it does.
And American. That's what we say it in America.
As good Danish.
It's a good Danish there. If our listeners are interested in following along as it is developed, or they would like to contribute to the project, we'll have the links available in our show notes. So you go check this out. I mean, I'm always... competition is the reason why Microsoft's season pass is so inexpensive right now as they're trying to beat the competition. So more competition is good. So I'm 100% for this 2A. We're happy to support you. We think everybody should go over there and support you as well.
Yeah, check out the links for sure.
Okay. On to questions. Tim is in an apartment in Vancouver. It's a pretty small space because it cost $1.2 bajillion. Because Vancouver is the San Francisco in the Bay Area of Canada.
Definitely.
It's a pretty small space, so he's only about 9 feet from his front speakers. Previously, he was using Polk RTI series setup with towers, completely unnecessary, and added a pair of KEF Q50A Atmos modules for front heights in the 5.1.2 configuration. He just got a pair of KEF Q150 bookshelf speakers and tried them out as his front mains in place of his towers. I'm not laughing at you. I'm laughing at what you almost certainly, the mental gymnastics you had to go through to get to that point and then do it and go, dang it, they were right. The improvement in sound quality convinced him to also move his Q50A modules from their front height positions to his surrounds, and overall, even though it's now just a 5.1 configuration, he thinks it sounds better. I'm telling you, man, all the pictures of tower speakers, that are like 5 feet from listening positions just drive me batty. It just can't, I mean, I understand people. I love the way tower speakers look, but I had tower speakers in this room, and I am sitting at least in the same, probably as close as you, maybe even a little bit closer, and tower speakers just were not resolving properly in my room.
Right.
Never could get them to sound right. And I went to bookshelf speakers with the SVS Ultra bookshelves, never looked back. And do I think the Ultra bookshelves necessarily sound that much better than the Empyrean Varus Grand towers? Like full stop? No. But I do think that in my room at my seating distance, they make a bajillion times more sense.
And certainly in the images that have been sent, these do not look out of place whatsoever. They look certainly don't look too small.
No, they don't. They don't. They do look like you could accidentally kick them over from where you're sitting, though. But he's still using his Polk Center. So would it be worth it to upgrade to the KEF Q250C? Normally a pair of Q150 bookshelf speakers, only $100 more than the Q250C. But right now the 150s are on sale, so they're actually $200 less. But he doesn't need a pair. Plus, he's got his center positioned inside his TV stand, so maybe the front passive radiators on the 250C would be better than the rear port on the 150 in there. What do we say worth the cost? I literally wrote, or was it me or Andrew? I don't know. Yeah, it was me. I wrote an article yesterday. I have not published it, and probably won't be published for a week or two, for AV Gadgets, about whether or not you have to upgrade your center channel after buying new fronts. Or this was really from more of the planning stage. Like, I'm going to buy new fronts. Do I also need to replace my center? And the reality is, you're past that point. You've got the new fronts there, and you can test it. You can listen to something that pans across the front of your room, and how much worse does it sound? Does it change timbre? Does it, the sound of the car as it's going from left to right or right to left, does it sound like the sound one way, then it gets towards the center and sounds completely different, then it gets to the other side and it sounds the way it sounded at the beginning? If that's it, then yes, you have to change. Now, if it sounds pretty uniform all the way across, well, then you don't have to necessarily change. You don't. If you did want to put if you did want to get the 150 bookshelf and put it inside, we definitely have a article for that on AV Gadgets. And it's all about having to deal with that rear port. You want to make sure, first of all, that you've pulled your speaker far enough forward that you can, that the front is proud of the front of the bookshelf, or whatever shelf it's in. That would be true if it was the center, if it was a dedicated center or not. It doesn't make any difference. You want to have that. But if it's rear ported and and there's not a lot of space back there, I would cut out the back of that shelf so that there was air being able to flow out. And I would also fill at least the sides and around the speaker with insulation as much as I could, which might be a good idea to do, even if you just not to cut it out the back, but the insulation part would be not necessarily a bad thing to do, even if you had the dedicated center. So you can use the bookshelf speaker laying on its side,
particularly with KEF,
because of the concentric driver. It's when you have something like a horn-loaded speaker with an asymmetric horn that is designed to increase the width of the soundstage, but not necessarily the height. When you turn on its side, it's now increasing the vertical dispersion instead of the horizontal dispersion. That's problematic. But with the KEF concentric design, where it's the off-axis response is the same up and down versus left and right, I think turning that on its side is really not that big of a problem. So
not at all.
I mean, I would take a couple of precautions, but honestly, having an extra KEF speaker just lying around that matches all the rest of them that you have in here, it's just sort of like insurance in case something goes horribly awry.
Yeah,
somebody knocks over a speaker.
Where the price points are right now, I would probably just grab the pair of Q150s that, as a pair, cost less than the C250, and just use one of them and have a spare, or sell it, recoup some of the cost, because there are other people looking to purchase just
doing
one.
The same thing.
Just do the same thing, use it as a center. But a couple of other thoughts that I had. One, I'm fairly sure that you probably have your center in the TV stand below the TV, because there isn't enough space when you're using the TV's integrated, stand, its pedestal stand, to put the center below it. But if you were to get one of those universal TV stands that uses the VESA mounts on the back so that you can actually raise the height a bit, if you could get your center speaker on top of your TV stand, below the bottom edge of your TV, so you'd have to raise the TV a little bit in order to accommodate that, but that would likely improve your sound quality doing that. It might even be enough with the bulk that you already have, again, doing that test of it panning across the front. But that would certainly mitigate any concerns about the porting structure if you had the center speaker on top of the TV stand and below the TV itself. So that, and then my personal feeling is that I would anticipate that upgrading your center would make a worthwhile difference. In my experience,
I would too.
It wouldn't be my prediction that the Polk center you already have would be a perfect timbre match to the KEF fronts that you have. So I certainly don't think it's one of the, I'm not going to be telling you, oh no need to even consider upgrading your center. No, I would definitely consider upgrading your center, but do the test first because you already have what you have on hand. So have something that pans across the front and see if you notice that timbre change as it goes left center right or right center left,
because it's not $0. I guess it's what it comes down to. And if you're not noticing a timbre difference, yes, the upgrade to changing your center channel will make the timbre would make it perfect in essence, or about as perfect as it can be. But I don't know, if you don't notice it, is it ever really worth the money? Mentally, psychologically, you're like, yes, these speakers are all the same, so now I have nothing to worry about, which, Rob will tell you with his perfectly exact speakers all around his room, even though he doesn't need those things.
Certainly not in the heights and backs.
He will tell you that, psychologically, it makes him feel better to know that they are all perfectly timbre matched. But if I were to sneak in there and swap out some of those speakers with other speakers, how long would it take him to notice if he wasn't looking at them? Might be quite some time. So if you can't hear the difference, at least then I don't have to spend this money if I don't want to right now. But in the future, I might. But for now, I can spend it on something else, like a second subwoofer.
But I'd be pretty keen on raising that television using one of those universal TV stands that plugs into the VESA mounts on the back. And going by the image, there's nothing restricting you raising that height on the television a bit.
And we've got an AV Gadgets article that talks about where to buy that, and which one to buy, and stuff like that. So, and other options you might have. Infinite Gary, first up, just sharing a couple of photos of the new Dynado Heritage special bookshelf speakers that Gary bought. He's a big fan. They are wooden boxes. They look they're very nice.
He likes the looks. He likes the sound. In fact, he loves the sound.
They're very retro. They have a retro look.
All right.
Heritage
like specials.
Scan, speak, tweeter.
Thumbs up from Gary.
So what spec do you look for in order to determine whether an audio amplifier is high current? It's never crossed my mind that I would look at a spec and say to it, it's a high current amplifier. They all
I've certainly seen that recommendation in speaker reviews that you're going to want to use a high current amplifier.
Isn't that just a lot of watts? I mean,
the easiest spec to look at, most amplifiers, somewhat reputable amplifiers that you're buying from, sort of external amplifiers, will give you two spec ratings, one into 8 ohms and one into 4 ohms. Now, you do need to be careful because there are all sorts of parameters that go along with those. And very often, the spec into 4 ohms, maybe it'll be with higher harmonic distortion, or maybe it'll be into a smaller range of frequencies. Sometimes it'll be only at 1 kilohertz when they're listing the 4 ohm rating, versus it'll be the entire audible frequency range when they're listing the 8 ohm rating. So it's not necessarily that the parameters are always identical between the 8 ohm rating and the 4 ohm rating. But if you look at the 8 ohm rating and the 4 ohm rating, ideally, theoretically, what an amplifier should do is double its number of watts when the impedance is cut in half. So if it's a 200 watts into 8 ohms, theoretically and ideally it would be 400 watts into 4 ohms. And the closer that the spec is to that, the true spec, again, make sure all the parameters are like for like, but the closer the true spec is to that, then the higher the current, the higher the amperage that amplifier is able to send into any given speaker load, regardless of what the impedance might be. So that's the main indicator in the spec sheet that we would look at. We would compare the 8 ohm rating versus the 4 ohm rating, and the closer that 4 ohm rating is to being double the number of watts as the 8 ohm rating, the closer we are to what anybody would consider a high current amplifier.
Yeah, there's ways to fudge that number, and I've actually talked to amplifier manufacturers before, and one of the things that they'll do is they'll rate it into 4 ohms, because what happens is, as everybody knows, you lose some of your power to heat.
Sure.
That's why we say Class A, B amps are 50% efficient. Class D amplification could be up to 80% or maybe even more efficient, which means that more of their power goes into power and less of it goes into heat. So what they'll do is they'll rate it into 4 ohms, and that's their true rating. And then for the 8 ohms, they just double that number, which it'll definitely hit that 8 ohm spec, but it actually can put more power into 8 ohms than what they're actually claiming, because they know people look for that doubling, even though they could actually claim a higher 8 ohm wattage. They'd rather have the number be perfectly doubled than have it say we can put 250 watts into 8 ohms and 400 watts into 4 ohms. They want to see that 200 and 400 number show up. So there are lots of ways that they can manipulate that. So the last thing I really look at is watts when it comes to amplifiers. I want to have a general sense, of how many watts it's putting out, but I don't really care if it's 250 or 225 or perfectly doubled or any of these other things.
But sometimes you will see an amp and it's rated at 80 watts into 8 ohms and then 110 watts into 4 ohms, and it's like, well, that one clearly is not doubling. And sometimes that's even with some of the parameters fudged in the 4 ohm rating. So when you see something like that, it's sort of an indication that there's a bottleneck somewhere in the signal path there, or that it just doesn't have. Typically, it's that it just doesn't have the capacitor enough capacitance basically built in there to allow that doubling down of current. So there are indications in there. All of it can be fudged, but if you're seeing something that's got a nice high power rating and it's close to a doubling into 4 ohms, then calling it a high current amplifier, I'm still fine with that. Even if it's fudged a little bit, it's still going to be, a high current amplifier.
It's almost literally, first of all, literally any amplifier that Gary would buy you would never have to worry about this.
That's right.
You would never have to worry about this. He's never going to buy a Fosse amp and do something with it, But when
he might for something, but it's just for fun. Not to power his Dynaudio Heritage Special.
No, he's not. So when you look at, when you're worried about these things, that's when you're really trying to be a super budget about all of that. And an amplifier like that, I would never trust to go into 4 ohms anyways. So that's that. Right, he came across a speaker with specs stating that the recommended amplifier power is between 50 and 1,000 watts. It's a much bigger range than what he typically sees listed for most speakers. The same speaker claims 90 dB sensitivity at 2.85 volts 1 meter away and is rated with 8 ohms nominal impedance. So if you were actually put 1,000 watts into it, how many decibels is it actually producing? I'm not doing that math.
There's the very simple math, which is that every time you multiply the number of watts by 10, so from 1 to 10 or 10 to 100, that increases the decibel output by 10 decibels. So we can very quickly go, okay, that 2.83 volts from 1 meter away into an 8 ohm load, that's 1 watt. So it's saying from 1 meter away, 1 watt gives you 90 decibels out of those speakers. So that means 10 watts is going to give you 100 decibels, 100 watts is going to give you 110 decibels, and 1,000 watts is going to give you 120 decibels of output from that speaker from 1 meter away. Now, we could stop there because that's the answer. From 1 meter away, the 1,000 watts is giving you 120 decibels, and there are definitely speakers capable of that. Concert speakers in an amphitheater are going to be capable of much more than that. So for a home speaker, that is louder than normal, no question about it. It's meant for a large, probably, that would qualify for THX Dominus if, as far as the output spec goes. You could have 6,500 cubic feet and be sitting about 20 feet away and be able to hit full reference volume, but as you move farther away physically from the speaker, then the number of decibels drops. The anechoic spec for that, out in a wide open field or in an anechoic chamber, every time you double your distance, so from 1 to 2 meters or 2 meters to 4 meters, you would lose 6 decibels of output. But in a real room, we don't lose that much, because even in a well-treated, damped room with lots of acoustic panels, but 30% of the surface area covered, not 100%, you're not going to lose 6 decibels with every doubling of distance. It's going to be more like 4, typically, in a well-treated room. So that's going to depend a bit, how many decibels would actually reach your ears. Depends on how far away you are and how heavily padded your room is. But from 1 meter away, 120 decibels is the answer, with 1,000 watts from that speaker.
There you go. Paul has been a Projector owner for over 20 years. His current setup is a Sony VW295ES with a 92-inch Stewart film screen. Just a side note, he could have physically fit a larger screen. And if you see the pictures here on YouTube's, or click on the Flickr, you still use Flickr?
I do still put them up at Flickr, yep.
You can see it. It's a very nice setup he's got going on here. He could fit a larger screen, even with his on-wall Martin Logan speakers up front, but he found 92 inches to be just right for his taste. And it's a very nice setup.
Very clean, very nice looking.
Very clean. Yes, it is. So here are the positives first. He has full light control. The projector looks superb for SDR content and is nice and quiet in low lamp mode. He remains a fan of 3D, and projectors still support that. One of his favorite genres is late 80s horror films, and most of those are still in SDR. And he's already got a spare lamp on hand since he was concerned about supply chain issues. Dude, I got my lamp so fast, I was shocked. I was expecting weeks. And I just went, for those of you that are lamp buyers, I just went to Projector Central's suggested places and clicked on all of them. First of all, 2 of them, I swear, are the same place. It is the same website.
It's the same site, yeah.
It's got different names and different colors, but the layout and the prices are all identical. It's the same place, okay? Or at least it was made by the same people. So, and there was prices all over the place, but I got it. Like they said, your average price is going to be this, and I bought it for a little bit less than half. Well, a little bit more than half of that. So, that's how I found my stuff. And then I asked Rob if we had any other places that we go to, and he said no. Basically, so
that's where I look these days, and they are geolocated, so you'll get different results based on where you're searching from.
That's right. So as we might have guessed, the one drawback is HDR. The picture actually looks dimmer overall in HDR mode versus SDR mode, and that's despite having invested in a Panasonic UB9000 Ultra HD Blu-ray player for his HDR optimizer. But one wrinkle is that even when he's watching HDR, he keeps the projector in low lamp mode because of the fan noise. So here's his dilemma. LG has announced their 97-inch OLED. I know. And when my projector bulb went out, my wife and I had a conversation about how, well, first of all, let me tell you, if you can do this the way I did it, and I did it on accident, Paul, if you can do it the way that I did it, this is the way to do it, okay? So I said to my wife, we need to talk about, we're going to have to make a purchase pretty soon, and it's only a matter of time. And she expected me to say a car. Now I don't know why she expected me to say a car, but she did. So when I said a TV, she was like, "Oh, that's much less expensive than a car," and she was like totally on board.
To be fair, the 97-inch OLED might not be that much less expensive than a car, or it might be more expensive than some cars, but I don't think that's quite what you were aiming for. Right.
That's what so she asked me how much I thought a new display would be, and I said between $3,000 and $8,000. Now, why did I pick $8,000, Rob?
So that why did I pick $5,000 would sound more reasonable, or $8,000 is the 98-inch?
That's the 98-inch.
Yeah. But also, the 83-inch OLED is $5,000. So if you land in the middle of your range, then it sounds
pretty, so nice.
Sounds pretty reasonable. Nice.
So she was like, "Well, okay, that seems like a reasonable amount of money." I'm like, "Okay." So I've planted the seeds. Paul, do that. Make your wife think you're going to buy a new car and then spring a projector on it. All right. LG has announced their 97-inch OLED, but it's almost certainly going to be very expensive and also doesn't do 3D.
Yeah.
JVC has their new lineup of projectors, but they're pretty expensive too. Not as expensive as a car.
No.
And there are newer models than his VW295ES from Sony to consider as well. Would upgrading his projector this year make sense? He's happy with what he already has for everything other than HDR, so he settled on just leaving his Apple TV 4K and Panasonic player, outputting everything in SDR. Would any of the newest projectors make such an improvement that would be worth it, or does he keep what he has and wait for huge flat panels to come down in price?
Yeah, I know.
So the problem here, I believe, is that no matter what he does, fan noise is going to end up being an issue if he wants good HDR out of a projector.
Well, that's just it, because let's imagine he replaces his projector with one of the newer Sonys or one of the newer JVCs.
He still has to go into high lamp mode.
That's right. If you also keep any of those in low lamp mode all the time, it's not. I mean, the thing is, you could get the frame-by-frame dynamic tone mapping.
Right.
That'll make some difference. And with the okay, we have to be a bit careful because Panasonic calls their thing the HDR optimizer. JVC has software that they call their theater optimizer. And the idea there is that on the JVC projectors, they have frame-by-frame dynamic tone mapping. And then JVC's theater optimizer is where you enter values for the size of your screen, the gain of your screen, and it detects what picture mode and lamp mode you're in. So it adjusts itself with that knowledge of those parameters. It adjusts its frame-by-frame dynamic tone mapping. So would I anticipate that if you, say, got one of the JVCs, that HDR would look different than it currently looks on your Sony 295ES? Yes, I would anticipate that you would see a difference. You would probably have more detail retained in HDR. But if you insist on keeping the JVC in low lamp mode all the time, it's still not going to look brighter. It's still going to, and in fact, I would anticipate HDR would still look overall dimmer than SDR, just as it does now, because HDR really is meant on projectors to be used with the high lamp mode. That's just the way it is. It's meant to be used with the high lamp mode. So given that, my genuine answer to you is you already got a spare lamp, so that's on hand.
Yeah.
Is the fan noise so objectionable that, because I mean, honestly, if you just throw the Sony that you currently have into high lamp mode when you're in HDR, which is as simple as you put it in there and now that's memorized every time it switches between SDR and HDR, it'll just automatically change lamp modes along with it. Like, to me, that's the answer, is keep what you have and just start using the high lamp mode for HDR.
Well, okay. So what I'm going to suggest is exactly the same, except I think that you should consider installing, buying, constructing a hush box for your projector. So that you can put it into, because I think that what you'll end up, and make sure it's bigger than what you need. Like,
right.
Yeah, I mean, make sure that it can fit a future projector in there as well. My idea here is that you are going to be sensitive to high lamp mode or fan noise, full stop.
Okay.
Because you've got full light control, which says to me you've got a very quiet environment and maybe fully treated, so any amount of noise is going to bother you.
Could be.
Which means I think you invest in a hush box, and then in the future when you want to upgrade your projector, you won't have to worry about this again, because I feel like this will continue to be a problem as long as you have a projector. And I think a hush box is going to cost a lot less than upgrading your projector just to have it look a little bit different but still dimmer and everything else. I think that you could enjoy your current projector at least until these two lamps go out, and then you can start deciding whether or not you want to get a new projector. But the hush box would full stop fix this problem that you're having.
Yeah. Looking at if you were to go to a very large flat panel alternative, none of them are going to do 3D. That's just gone now. So if you really do want to hold on to being able to watch 3D in 3D, you are going to have to stick with a projector. So that kind of answers it from that side. Now, of course, if DJ were here, he would weigh in and say that, add a Lumigen to your current Sony, because that's exactly the setup he has. But he's switching to high lamp mode in HDR, and again, given the price of the Lumigen, I'd be like, I'd probably just go get one of the JVCs instead and have my frame-by-frame dynamic tone mapping that way if you were going to spend that much. So to me, I'm in agreement with Tom. Both of us are saying keep the projector you have because there's not a big enough difference, honestly, to completely replace it at this point. I mean, the frame-by-frame dynamic tone mapping is really, really nice, but you're going to have to put it into high lamp mode. So either way, put your projector into high lamp mode. And then, if it is the fan noise that bothers you too much, then not the hush box is the solution. I don't see a better solution than that with where you are right now.
And I think that it'll future-proof your system so that when you do decide to upgrade your projector or get a 4K projector, I don't know if this one's 4K or not.
It is, yes. Yeah, this is genuine 4K, the model that he has.
I just don't see that getting a new projector and running it in low lamp mode is going to make you feel like your money was well spent. Right. I feel like the hush box and high lamp mode will put new life into everything that you've been seeing.
I wish I had a really good place to point you for the hush box, because of course that's going to be the natural question. You said, hey, get a hush box. Where do I get one of those? I wish I had a really good, so I don't anymore. I mean, there was really one guy out of his garage selling good hush boxes, and he stopped years ago. And I just don't have a great place to point you. So that's something you're probably going to have to hit up AVS forum and see about hush boxes, because it's just not a big enough market that there's any big company selling hush boxes for projectors.
You might just have to find some sort of plan online and find somebody who's got
mostly going to be
the skills to do it if you don't have them yourself.
Yeah.
Alex has an LG C8 OLED. After he recently updated its firmware, it flickers near black. He was using the settings that Rob listed on our website, AVRant.com, and he was very happy with the results prior to this firmware update. But now that it's flickering near black, he's tried a few different picture modes and turned the brightness setting down, but it hasn't been able to get back to the way it used to look. Is there a simple fix? Is it rolling back the firmware? I bet it's rolling back the firmware.
Well,
there's a lot of links here. How long is this going to take you?
Enough for you to go grab a coffee, sure, because I can always go on to the next one, because Tom needs some fresh coffee. So I'll start going through these links that I'm going to have, because, of course, Vincent T.O. over at HDTV Test, back when the C8 was the new kid in town, did come across this issue, this flickering near black and also macro blocking near black, and made a whole video about it explaining what was going on there. And at the time when the C8 was new, there wasn't really anything you could do about it. It was just explaining why it was happening. Now, about a year, or not quite a year later, about 9 months later, LG released a firmware update. That was firmware number 5.10.20. And that was good. That firmware basically fixed what was going, at least the worst of it, the worst of the flickering. There was still some, macro blocking in the worst, most heavily compressed video feeds that you might get in that. And there wasn't anything they could do to fix that. But it got rid of the flickering, and that was almost certainly what Alex was using. Now, I did notice that if you go check what is the latest firmware right now, it is 5.45.04, which, higher firmware number, and there hasn't been an updated, review of that by Vincent T.O., because this is going back to the C8. That's a 2018 TV model. So the chances that they broke something in the new firmware is definitely higher than zero. There's every possibility that unfortunately they did that, because there was some back and forth with firmwares along the way where they would fix one thing and something else would break, and it wasn't until they got to 5.10.20 that pretty much everything was stable and good. So this wouldn't be shocking. I don't know. I can't confirm that 5.45.04 definitely broke something, but if it did, it wouldn't shock me. You're not crazy if you were using 5.10.20 before, and now this unfortunately has happened once you did the update. Rolling back the firmware is not an easy process. There's instructions on AVS forum for how to do it. It uses Linux to do it. So it might be a real can of worms, but there are instructions how to do it if you want to, if this is really bothering you. I don't know of a great solution, because there was no fix for that near black flickering issue when it first occurred. It wasn't until they did multiple firmware updates and eventually got to that 5.10.20 version that it was fixed. And if they've henceforth broken it again, other than waiting for them to fix it again, I don't know if they would, because a whole bunch of people would probably have to complain, which might happen, but a lot of people upgrade their OLEDs on a pretty regular basis, which is crazy for how expensive they were. But I don't have huge confidence that they're going to fix it again. So I don't have great news, Alex. I'm really sorry about that, but I will have the link to the instructions on how to roll back the firmware from AVS Forum. It is not a simple fix, but it might be the only fix. There.
I was right?
Yeah.
Good.
You saw the links. You knew what was coming.
I did not see the links. I did not. I didn't look at any of that. I just saw the big wall of blue and went, oh, it's a bunch of links. All right, Julian. Julian came across a strange issue with his Marantz SR8015 receiver. Seemingly out of nowhere, he was getting picture but no sound from any of his HDMI sources. HEOS and analog sources still worked fine. He used the web interface to back up all of his settings and did the full factory reset on the receiver. Immediately after the reset, HDMI audio was working again. But once he loaded his settings that he had saved, it stopped working. Thankfully, he had used the Odyssey Editor app, so he did another full factory reset, then loaded his Odyssey calibration from his tablet, then adjusted all the other settings manually rather than using his saved settings. What is the deal with the H's?
I am not sure. Typos on my end, but whatever. Nobody else saw that. That is completely how the sausage is made behind the scenes. But yes, I had typos in my show notes. Apologies.
It's fine, but it's funny. I was just like, I feel like I did something wrong. Now everything is working properly. But he just wants to know what could have happened that made HDMI audio stop working before. When that was happening, he could open the info menu and see that it was still showing the audio signal coming in, and all of his speaker channels indicators lit up, but they just weren't making any sound. Any ideas? I mean, I just want to say mute button, but I know that can't be it because it could have shown something on the screen. A lot of times, you can select a different audio other than but why would that still show the speakers coming? I don't know. Rob, what's the answer?
I only have one setting that it could have been that I could come across that explains everything, all the symptoms that you described as they were. Because, of course, there's the thing of like if, say, the receiver had been put into preamp only mode where it turns off the internal it turns off the internal amplifiers, and you
can do that without it being in direct.
Yeah, on the SR8015, you have preamp only mode where it turns off the internal amplifiers. But if you had done that, then your analog sources would not have made any sound either. It wouldn't be specific to HDMI, just nothing would have been making any sound, and you would have really thought that something was super, super wrong. So it couldn't be that. Basically all I could come up with is under the audio section, there is the because it's HDMI audio out, I forget which subsection this is in. Anyway, the setting is called HDMI audio out. There is a setting called HDMI audio out, and there are the options between AVR and TV. And the idea is that if for some reason you just want to use your AV receiver as an HDMI switch, this is how you would do it.
So it would be like a night thing when you turn off all your speakers, except that, and now you get the audio straight from your TV.
Yeah, that's right. It passes the audio through to your TV so that your TV speakers could play it. So he's using a projector. I know that. So there would be no sound coming out of the projector. So I looked through this and I'm like, this explains it, because if this had happened, if somehow that HDMI audio out setting had been set to TV instead of AVR, then the video would still be working. Your analog sources and all that would still be working because this only applies to the HDMI inputs, but it would be attempting to send the audio through to a television, which yours being a projector doesn't have any speakers built in, so everything would function, but the audio wouldn't be coming out of the AV receiver. So I'm like, it explains the scenario, and it is just a setting. So if you had saved your settings and reloaded them, and somehow HDMI audio out had been set to TV, it would explain it, because when you redid things manually, by default, it's set to AVR. So it would have had to have been switched to TV at some point. But I'm like, I couldn't find another setting that explained this exact scenario, and it is entirely possible. So to me, I think that's what happened. I couldn't come up with another setting that could have done this.
I'm going to have to go close that door. I left it open thinking it wasn't going to be a big deal, but it is cold in this house. No, I'm wearing a t-shirt, so I really shouldn't complain, but it's very cold. The heater is on for the first time this year.
Holy smokes.
It's very cold in here. Brandon has 3 Denon receivers, all of them with a full set of pre-outs, and he has setups in his theater, family room, and office. All 3 setups include some in-ceiling speakers. He was hoping to find a convenient way to use those in-ceiling speakers for Atmos whenever he's watching something, but then be able to use just in-ceiling speakers for Hios when he wants some multi-room audio. Is there an automatic speaker wire switch or an automatic RCA switch that could make that work? So you would need to use the pre-outs on your receiver to feed
the Atmos channels first.
The Atmos channels, right. The
and
pre-outs.
then you could maybe
into
use
like a distribution amp, and then use those as inputs, and then switch inputs to a different input when you wanted to use the whole house audio.
Yeah, because let's say for your Atmos channels, you were using the pre-outs, which we said all 3 have full set of pre-outs, so that could be done.
Right.
And then for the Hios, you could do that from zone 2, because you can send Hios out of zone 2, and you could use the zone 2 pre-outs. So you could have pre-outs for both signals, and that would be controllable. So I came up with a thing that I think would work. It's quite a few components and not exactly super cheap, but because just to cut to the chase, the stereo amplifiers such as Dayton's APA 102, which is an amplifier we recommend quite often. It's just a stereo amplifier, class D, 60 watts per channel, but on the back of that, its RCA inputs, it has a main pair of RCA inputs, just left and right, because it's just a stereo amp, and then it has an interrupt. It's actually labeled interrupt set of left and right inputs. So the idea here would be the pre-outs. Now this would only work for a pair, so you'd need, if you have 4 overhead speakers in each room, then you're going to need 6 of these for however many pairs of overhead speakers you have. You're going to need one of these amplifiers for each pair of overhead speakers.
Right.
But the idea would be that the pre-outs for the overhead speakers when it's Atmos time, those would just go into the main inputs of this amplifier. And then the zone 2 pre-outs could go into the interrupt. So that when you activate Hios and you use the app to tell it to output the Hios signal from the zone 2 pre-outs, that would go to the interrupt. The way this works is by default, the Dayton amplifier plays whatever's connected to the mains, but if it detects a signal on that interrupt input, then it'll switch to that, just as the name sort of implies.
A 4-channel distribution amp with 3 it would need 3 sets of RCA inputs, right? Yes.
Well, but most of the distribution amps, they only give you a couple of RCA inputs that will send the signal to all of the channel pairs.
You can't select the pairs themselves on those? I thought you could.
You can individually, but it's not like you'd have to send the Atmos pre-outs to the individual channels and then somehow have the stereo input that's coming from the zone 2 override them, and it doesn't do that automatically. You can manually toggle between whether you're using the individual RCA inputs for each channel or the stereo inputs that go across all channels. You can manually toggle, but it usually doesn't do that automatically on a distribution amp. That's why I was like, these stereo amps, Outdoor Speaker Depot has an alternative as well that's a little bit less expensive, because the Dayton APA 102 is $155 for one of them, which, it's not crazy, but if you do end up buying 6 of them, that's not cheap. Outdoor Speaker Depot also has a very similar one called the XMP 100 for $139, but they're almost exactly the same. So those were the ones I could find that had this interrupt input. The distribution amplifiers, you usually have to manually toggle which inputs the signal is going to. So I think the interrupt is important in this case because he wants it to be automatic.
Yeah. I think that there's probably a distribution amp that will do what
maybe
you want it to do.
I just don't know it.
But I don't know that it's going to be cheaper than buying
right
$300 worth of amplifiers like this for each room
per room.
Basically,
and he didn't say that
you would need Y splitters too, wouldn't you, for the zone 2, because you need to send them to both amps.
Yeah. You'd need
Y splitters.
But that's assuming he's got 4 overheads in the room.
You're right.
In his theater, he probably does, but maybe in the office he only has 2. That's entirely possible.
So maybe he needs a total of 4.
Yeah,
of
could be
these,
something like that.
Amps.
So I mean, the thing is, this isn't like insane expensive. $155 for a stereo amp. That's it's pretty reasonable. So depending on how many ceiling speakers that you have, or maybe he's like, you know what? I do have 4 in-ceiling speakers, but when it's Hios time, I really only need 2 of them. Well, you'd only need 1 of these stereo amplifiers per room in that case. And at that point, it's not that crazy expensive. So I think that's a somewhat reasonable solution. But yeah, if you are going to end up doing this to 4 overhead speakers in each room, it means 2 of these stereo amplifiers in each room.
Right. And good luck trying to explain how this works to anybody else.
Right.
I keep seeing posts of people like, I moved into a new house and this is what's on the wall. And it's just like a bank of speaker, like a 5-way binding posts on the wall.
Right.
And they're like, what do I do with it? And everybody's like, I mean...
Yeah, the trickiest part is going to be making sure that when it's Hios time, you make sure it's going from the zone 2 output on all of them, which is entirely doable, but it's just going to be, like, as Tom is alluding to, if you're explaining to somebody else, is not necessarily intuitive.
Yeah, and with Harmony being out of the business right now, you can't even make some sort of massive macro that does the entire thing.
The Hios thing is all on the app anyway, so you're kind of relying on that.
Well, but you can change. You could change all the inputs on the AV receivers with a macro.
I suppose,
which is what you would need to do.
Yeah. No, I mean, when it's Hios time, you've just got to say where it's playing from. So the thing is, if it's somebody else, if it's not you, if they say, okay, play a Hios source in the family room, if they don't send it to zone 2, then it's just going to come out of your regular floor level speakers. That's what. Right. So they'll still get sound, and they'll probably be happy with that. And if you then come along and say, hey, I only want it out of the overheads, you can switch it to zone 2. So I still think it's doable.
Ilango is going to end up having 12 zones for whole house audio, 24 channels in all. 10 of the zones are using Sonos Mag 6 in-ceiling speakers, and 2 of the zones, all patio and garage, the patio and the garage, are using KEF Ventura outdoor speakers.
That's some.
He used to have a 12. I know. He used to have a 12-channel HTD distribution amp, but he gave it to his brother a while ago. He'd be fine with buying 2 more of the HTD DMA 1240 amps at $800 each. It's a Class D. It's rated to deliver 40 watts into all 12 channels simultaneously, all channels driven. But he looked around a bit and also found Dayton's distribution amps at lower prices. There's the Dayton MA 1240A for only $630, and the Dayton MA 1260 for $740. The 1240 is also rated at 40 watts per channel to 8 ohms, but it's Class AB, and the 1260 is rated 60 watts per channel to 8 ohms, and it's Class D. So any reasons such as build quality, reliability, brand reputation, etc., to pick a certain model out of these, will AB versus D in the amplifier classes make any difference? Will 60 watts versus 40 watts make any difference? I mean, I just picked the cheapest one.
Surprise.
I mean, I just don't see that 20 watts here or and okay, so this is whole house audio, right? So we're not talking about worrying about audio quality. You want to have a decent audio quality, but you're not like sitting there doing critical listening tests and everything else. You just want there to be sound everywhere and to sound pretty good. And I would not worry about Class D versus Class AB one iota.
And none of the speakers that you mentioned are going to be super picky about that. So you've got easy to drive speakers, Class AB versus Class D, not a concern. Would having 60 watts versus 40 watts make some kind of giant difference? I really wouldn't anticipate it. Really would not. No. One thing I did notice though, so first of all, Dayton, they have some nice interior shots. So if I'm showing what the 1240A looks like on the inside, it's got two transformers, two EI core transformers up at the front, and then a whole bunch of capacitor banks on those 12 output channels. So I'm actually quite impressed by what they're having internally there. But if we actually flip over to the 1260, that's the Class D version with the 60 watts per channel, the highest wattage rating, I'm super impressed what they've got going on in there. They've got a pair of toroidal transformers in there, which I was not expecting to see. It's heavy. It's like a 50-pound, like weight, 50-pound amplifier for this thing. Definitely the heaviest out of the group. What actually caught my eye the most, though, in the specs, I wasn't able to find internal shots of the one that you mentioned from HTD, so I'm not sure exactly what they're going on there. But the weight was kind of an indicator because it was, I think, 25 pounds. So I don't think it has dual toroidal transformers like the Dayton 1260 does. Pretty sure on that. But the signal-to-noise ratio. The signal-to-noise ratio is listed now. Signal-to-noise ratio is listed as 105 decibels for both the 1240A from Dayton and the 1240 from HTD. Nothing wrong with that. Very, very reasonable. But the 1260 from Dayton, 115 signal-to-noise ratio, 115 decibel signal-to-noise ratio, which is really impressive. And I would guess, actually, that those toroidal power supplies have something to do with that, because having that very quiet linear power supply as your starting point is a help when it comes to your signal-to-noise ratio. So just in terms of the design and the signal-to-noise ratio and being rather surprised at what Dayton packed into that MA1260, I'm kind of like extra impressed by the 1260. And given that it's not even the most expensive, and it's the highest wattage rating, and it has this design, I'm kind of tempted by that thing. But none of that is to say it would actually deliver truly audibly different results.
Right.
Whether you're
not in your application.
Yeah, in whole house audio, if you're going to notice that signal to noise ratio, if you're going to notice the 20 extra watts, I have rather serious doubts that you would. If you just said, I'm going to get the cheapest out of these, there is nothing off-putting to me about the 1240A from Dayton, which was the least expensive out of this group. In fact, again, I'm kind of extra impressed by what I'm seeing inside of that thing. I wasn't expecting dual power supplies. I wasn't expecting that much of a capacitor filter bank on each of the channels. So I'm kind of impressed by the design of that one too. And if you're just like, hey, it's the cheapest and it'll get the job done, I would 100% be okay with that. I don't see any reason why the HDD also wouldn't be good, but it's the most expensive, and I'm not seeing a particular reason to get it over the Daytons. So one convenience factor, the Daytons are using Phoenix clips to attach your speaker wires. That's a bit of a hassle, but you only have to do it once. I
hate those things so much.
You only have to do it once. The HDD does have regular binding posts, so if that's worth at least $60 more to you is just having regular binding posts instead of Phoenix clips, then that's, you know what? I'd be fine with that. I'd be fine with that decision because it's your money. And if you're like, yeah, that's worth $60 to me. But my heart kind of went with the 1260 because I'm like, ooh, 2 toroidal transformers. I'm impressed.
I think audibly you're not going to.
I don't think audibly you're going
to these things. I do agree. I would probably err on the side of getting the regular binding post because I hate those Phoenix clips so much. They're such a pain to work with. If you're going to work with those, getting yourself some, it'll be fine. I'm just being particular.
You truly only do have to deal with them once. So
the one time I've had to use those things was with an amp that it was a standalone amp that I would use to test speakers, and I would take it out of its box, have to reconnect some speaker wire, and then use it to test the speaker in a room, and then put it away again. So I had to continually connect those Phoenix clips, and that's why I hate them so much. As no one uses it that way. No one. No one other than me has ever used it that way, and that's why I hate it, and that's not fair. So do not take my word that it's gonna be some big hassle. It's only a hassle once, and you're gonna be doing so many of them, you'll be an expert by the end.
Right.
Aras. First up, some updates and comments. He got his OLED and stayed away from the floor demo unit after we told him how to check for how many hours were on it. He also got a set of KEF reference speakers for his front 3. And since his receiver is a Denon X6700H, he picked up a pair of KEF Q150s just to try his front wides. You'll never go back to not having them. Whatever.
That's what he said, man. I'm just repeating what was emailed.
Yeah, I think all the people who have tried front wides and have emailed us and said this is crap and Tom's right, Rob's like, we don't need to include that on the podcast. While he can appreciate Tom's dismissal of them, since not all content makes use of front wides, when they do get use, he loves the extension of the sound field. Pixar's Brave and Disney's Encanto were particular standouts. I don't think I've ever seen Brave.
Oh, really? It's pretty good. I liked it. It was enjoyable.
I think I've seen pieces and then never finished it for whatever reason. I don't remember. Anyways, I can understand why he likes the front wides because his front left and right speakers are very close together. So I can understand why
always
front
has to
wides...
have an excuse for why someone would like front
I
wides.
don't have to have an excuse. I'm looking at it and thinking if you just separate your front left and right, you wouldn't need wides. That's all I'm saying. You want a wider sound stage? Separate your front left and... He can't because he's got a door there, so it's not his fault. But I do understand why he likes his wife so much. So there you go. He's got some questions here, though. He says he is house hunting. It's expensive where he lives, so if he goes for a detached house, it'll have to be on the lower end of the market. But if he goes for a townhouse or maybe a duplex, he can get more square footage. But of course, a townhouse or duplex means attached neighbors. I don't think I could ever do attached neighbors again. I got to be honest with you. So I'm not going to be the best person to ask for this, but I'm going to try to be unbiased. He could probably manage to decouple the walls of his home theater and do double drywall with green glue. But will that be enough to prevent attached neighbors from noticing that he has a home theater rocking next door? He doesn't typically listen at full reference volume, but it would be nice if he could watch something whenever he wants without worrying. What are our thoughts? There is no way you can decouple a wall and have it. I mean, you share a slab. I mean, the floor is still attached, so you would have to decouple the floor. You'd have to build a room within a room, basically, in order to do this.
And a really good room within a room.
Yeah, this would be more expensive. It's like you could afford the good house. If you can afford to do this, you can afford the house that doesn't have the neighbors attached.
I hate to say it, but it's true. Soundproofing is just not easy.
It's so expensive. Yeah. And people are like, well, can I just put some panels up on the wall and it'll absorb the sound? It's not a sponge. Yeah. Okay? It's not. It doesn't suck it all up.
And just doing the party wall, the shared wall, absolutely not a solution. You've still got ceiling joists that go between both units, or if they don't go between both units, they attach to a stud that goes between both. Anywhere there is a physical path for a vibration to get to both units, or both sides of the townhouse or both sides of the duplex,
you can do stuff. You can decouple your speakers, decouple your subwoofer, you can go to anything that's like an obvious, flanking path with like your outlets and stuff that are in this room and try to do as much as you can. But there is really no way to ensure that, other than building a room within a room, a really good one that is completely soundproofed and isolated from everything else in your house, airlock and all. All right, you need double doors with an airlock in between. If you don't have that, there is no guarantee that you're going to be able to play it whenever you want, as loud as you would like. Not necessarily reference volume, but as loud as you would like at any time of day. There is no guarantee. And if you get a crazy neighbor, and they definitely exist, you may not be able to play it at any volume at any time. Yeah. And I've experienced that in my own life, having a neighbor who's like, you guys are being too loud. I'm like, it's 3:00 in the afternoon and we're just sitting in our apartment talking. We're not even, yes, we're talking at, animatedly, I guess, or we're being a little, we're having a spirited conversation.
Like, you're not shocked that it's audible in their unit from your unit.
Right.
Yeah.
But, we're not being loud.
Yeah. And it's the middle of the afternoon. Yeah.
So I guess my thought here is if you're going to do this, if you're going to get a townhouse, do not walk into any I mean, your first thought when you walk into these places is probably already going to be, but the deciding factor is going to have to be, where is the home theater going to be, and how far away can I make it from my neighbors? And even then, expect that there is going to be, you're going to have to turn it down.
Yeah.
Even if it's at the other end, and the party wall, like the last apartment that I lived in, the party wall was on the bedroom, so the master bedroom. So there's a master bedroom with the bathroom, and everything else over there was the party wall. And then there was another space, and then there was the living room where I had my home theater. Back then, I had completely crap speakers and no subwoofer. So I had a bass module thing, so it was not really that much of an issue. But even then, I turned it down at night. I never listened to it very loud. In fact, I don't think I ever remember listening to it loud, full stop, back then. So that's what you'll have to do when you go into these townhouses.
Yeah, I have a first-hand example, because a friend of mine got a townhouse, and like he got the best case scenario townhouse that you could picture for wanting to build a home theater. It had a basement, which is coming up next. He's going to talk about basements, but it had a basement. He got it wasn't even like what you would call the corner unit of a townhouse. It was like the one unit that stuck out at the end. So it really only had one wall that was attached to anything else in the rest of the row of townhouses. So it wasn't even just that he was on the end unit. He was on like the archipelago unit that stuck out down there. We put the home theater in the basement. We did separated studs for the party wall. We did not do an entire room within a room, but finished the basement, did separated studs for the party wall, and he had a door for the stairs going up from the basement. Did all those things. He still can't blast it at night. It'll still get sound into the neighborhood, because like the stairway still vibrates enough that gets into the rest of the structure of the building, that it goes all the way. Like it can't really be done in a truly affordable manner. And if you're already talking about budget is going to be tight, I don't think you're going to end up with $35,000-$40,000 extra left over to build the room within the room to the way that you would need to really do this. So like we say, if you had that money, you could put it towards the detached house and probably get there, right? So I wish I could be more gung-ho about this. But having seen that firsthand in what has to be the best case scenario of what a townhouse could possibly be, and it's still, you still can't do it without that sound getting through late at night, and still vibrating things. So, Tom and I are in agreement. We wish we had better news for you, but
no, I don't.
No, I don't.
I don't have any better news
tough.
for you.
It's really tough.
I mean, I've had neighbors that have been great, and neighbors that have been atrocious. So and they change over time.
Yeah,
as people move and stuff.
Yeah.
So, and it's hard for me to look at this and say, well, just save more money and then be able to buy, because it seems like housing prices.
No, housing prices going up faster than your wages. I'm pretty sure. That's
right.
certainly the case for me.
For sure.
So.
Yeah. I mean, I know that, and speaking from experience, like I was looking at buying condos in Los Angeles before the housing market went way up in 2000 or crashed. Was it 2008 when it crashed? I think is when it crashed. Yeah. So I was looking like around 2001, 2002, and I was looking at places that were like $35,000 to $50,000 that, you can in 2008
get a domicile for that amount of money.
Yeah. I mean, they were not in great areas, but that's what I was looking at. And we kind of, my wife and I just were like, well, we're not ready to buy. It's too early, blah, blah, blah. But then those places sold for $200,000-$300,000 just 5 years later.
Yeah.
So there is no guarantee that there won't be another crash that you could take advantage of coming forward. So you could just save your money and hope, or
That's
it
not
just
a
might.
Plan, though.
It's not really a great plan. Yeah. All right. So lastly, he has another part of this question here. So if you can find a townhouse duplex with a basement in a location that won't be a concern for flooding, would it be easier to soundproof a basement for home theater? Would a basement mean he doesn't need to worry about soundproofing the floor as compared to the home theater on the first floor? And the answer again is no.
And this is super common. People think, oh, it's the concrete foundation. I don't have to worry about that. Isn't that basically inert? It's a lot harder and stiffer than the wood framing of my first floor. And
the drywall, yeah.
Unfortunately, vibrations of sound. So once the vibration gets into that concrete, it is true that the concrete foundation has more mass. There's no denying that it has more mass than the typical subfloor that's going on your first floor. So just by virtue of mass, it's going to be better at blocking high frequencies. You know, if you put a concrete wall in between two people talking versus a drywall wall in between two people talking, the concrete wall will be more soundproof to those higher frequencies. But if any physical vibration gets into that concrete, it transmits that. No problem whatsoever. Concrete is not inert at all. It is not inert. So
if you've ever seen a bridge vibrate itself to death,
that's right,
because of wind, that's essentially, I mean, that's concrete, you know, and rebar. So there is no,
it is not inert whatsoever, and
it's not vibranium, all right?
and vibrations will get into the concrete foundation if you don't do something. If you don't put down I mean, in a basement, again, it's a little bit different because you'd want to put down the dimpled plastic. I mean, he talked about he's concerned about getting a basement at all because he lives in an area that is susceptible to flooding. So if he's got to get one that's on the top of the hill, the likelihood of it flooding is very, very low. But even then, if you're in a moisture-prone area, you're going to want the dimpled plastic on the floor, then the rubberized layer over top of that, then the subfloor over top of that, whether or not you'll have the ceiling height in this basement to accommodate all of that, while also probably needing to decouple the ceiling, so you're losing height on both sides of it. Like, having a basement in the townhouse, and like I say, the first-hand example that I just gave, that was a basement in a townhouse. It was the best scenario you could come up with. It still isn't enough, unfortunately. So we don't have great news, but we also don't want to go telling you, oh yeah, get the townhouse. As long as it's got a basement, you're all good to go. That's not going to be the case. We'd be giving you horrible advice if we told you that. So wish I could tell you something happier, but
that basement, that whoever they poured for that basement is connected to the foundation of everything else, and you don't even know that there's not another basement on the other side of one of those walls. So you're once again having to build a room within a room. It may not have to be quite as airlocky as
I mean, what he's talking about, I don't picture him having 10 feet of ceiling height in the basement.
No, there's that too, right? You know, you're taking away space from every dimension.
Every dimension.
You know, and not a little bit either. I mean, it's like 3 or 4 inches, depending on what all you go with.
I count on 6 inches on every side.
And that's a foot. You lose a foot in every direction, and that's a lot of space to give up just so that you can play your music as loud as you want. And again, like Rob said, I think $35,000 to do a room within a room is a pretty reasonable number to.
Well, that's you doing it. That's not hiring somebody to do it. That's you doing it.
Right. That's like, if you're doing it on a budget, that's the budget you need, and that's a lot of money. So let us know what you end up doing. I'd be curious.
I really hope you can find a detached house. That's what I really hope.
Yeah. Bertrand just watched Dune on Ultra HD Blu-ray, which I'm gonna buy because DJ didn't give me his copy because he apparently doesn't support this podcast. That's the way I look at it. He's using a Panasonic UB820 player through his Marantz SR8015 receiver to a 77-inch LG CX OLED. He noticed that in one particular dark scene, there appeared to be posterization and color banding. Looking around at the online reviews, they all say the video on the Ultra HD Blu-ray is close to pristine, and no one mentioned this banding issue. So do we have any idea what might have caused this in this setup? You have your brightness or contrast set incorrectly, would be my guess, but I don't know.
There are 2 things that I definitely know could potentially cause this. One is, I don't think I've ever heard Bertrand mention it, but the C10 is compatible with AutoCal on CalMan. But if you use AutoCal it becomes prone to color banding. So you kind of don't really want to use AutoCal on a C10 OLED. They definitely become prone to color banding if you've used the AutoCal. He's never mentioned that he has, but just on the off chance that happened, I know that color banding becomes an issue after having run AutoCal on the C10 OLEDs. So that would be one thing. But if it isn't that, what I suspect this would be, the C10 OLED can accept a full 444 signal, but to accept it properly, you need to switch the input to PC mode. And you actually have to click the little inputs button that brings up sort of like a graphic representation of all the inputs that you have, and then you actually switch the icon. There will be a little icon that was assigned to the input. You switch the icon to the PC, and that puts it into PC mode. It's not that there's a PC picture mode to choose from the list of picture modes. You actually have to go into the graphic representation of the inputs and switch the input to PC mode. When the C10 is in PC mode, it handles 444 signals correctly, and you don't get this banding. If it's not in PC mode and you send it a 444 signal, you can end up with banding in your video signals. So, two things. One, either switch the input to PC mode, or if your Panasonic is set to output 444 chroma, which would be the only way that this would really happen, you could try switching that back to 420. Switch the Panasonic to outputting 420 chroma, and this should go away. So I
was right. It was a setting issue. I knew it. I'm so sorry.
Yeah, it just wasn't contrast brightness.
It just doesn't make any difference. Whatever. When setting up dual subwoofers, we've said that instead of using Odyssey Sub EQHT and the two subwoofer outputs on this Marantz, which end up setting separate distances and levels for his two subs, just set the Marantz to one subwoofer instead and use a Y splitter to send the exact same signal to both subs. Yes. He gave that a try following Rob's 12-step guide, and he got good results. But he wasn't quite sure. After the 12-step guide is done, is he supposed to remove the Y splitter and go back to using both subwoofer outputs on this Marantz, or is it okay to leave the subs connected through the Y splitter, and you can leave the subs connected through the Y splitter?
Yes, in fact, you have to for this to continue
the
working.
Other one won't work, right? Yeah. You definitely leave the Y splitter in place. You did all the setup with the Y splitter in place, and that is how you leave it. So we will have a link to the AV Gadgets article on how to set up dual subwoofers, which links to Rob's article, as well as teaches you how to do it without having to use an SPL meter.
Yeah.
So that's about the only difference between my write-up and Rob's write-up is I use the internal microphone, well, not the internal, but the microphone that's connected to the receiver, and Rob uses an SPL meter to level match the two subwoofers. Everything else is exactly the same. So he's got a 5.2.4 configuration, but he's got an extra pair of bookshelf speakers on hand, and he's been curious about trying 7.2.4. Could he use the two speaker presets on his Marantz SR8015 to compare? Once he has set up the 7.2.4 configuration as speaker preset 2, will it be as simple as pushing a single button on his remote to compare back and forth? Is this one of the ones that has dual Odyssey configurations?
The dual Odyssey configurations. It has the two speaker presets.
Yeah, that seems like that should be just fine.
Yep, you can absolutely do this. In fact, it's a great use of the two speaker presets. So you keep preset number 1 is exactly what you have, nothing gets destroyed, but then you reconfigure everything as though you were starting from scratch. But this time you're doing it as a 7.2.4, but then you just make sure to save that as preset number 2 so that you don't overwrite what you currently have on preset number 1. Switching between preset number 1 and preset number 2 isn't quite as simple as a single button press.
Right.
It's a few button presses, but it's not too crazy. In fact, I'll have a link to the Marantz manual that tells you exactly how to do it. And all it is, you're pressing the options button on the Marantz remote, and then you just have to scroll down to where it says speaker presets, and then press right for preset number 2 or left for preset number 1. So it's a few button presses, but it's not even digging into the full setup menu. It's from the options, the little options menu that just brings up the little convenient list. So really not too bad. It's not exactly instantaneous single button press, but it's pretty darn easy to switch between the two speaker presets, and that's a great use of it. I really love that they have the two presets now, because there's lots of scenarios where it's very handy.
For a very, 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 very niche community of people that care. Don't just
but that's
run
kind
it
of
once and call it
precisely
good.
who's listening to us. So
That's
for
true.
our audience,
That's true.
very nice.
Very nice to have. So when he's comparing a 5.2.4 versus 7.2.4, is it vital to use 7.1 soundtracks that have discrete surround back information, or will an upmixer like DTS Neural X allow him to hear the difference? You would use Atmos or DTS X. I don't know why you would use anything else. I mean...
Well, I mean,
I
in
don't
a
know.
way, I'm almost tempted to say that you're more certain to hear something coming out of those surround back speakers by using an upmixer, because there's plenty.
That is also true. Yeah.
Yeah, there's plenty of discrete soundtracks where the surround backs, they like the channel is discrete, but there's barely anything ever put in there. So I'm more tempted to say use the
Atmos
upmixer.
and DTS-X should use all the channels. I mean,
but it's still dependent on the mixer to have actually put any sounds back there, and they don't always. It's not always. In fact, there are Atmos mixes. It's Atmos. The signal is Atmos, where all of the sound is in the front three speakers. Like nothing else gets used at all. That's just how they decided to mix.
In that
the movie.
case, you might want to use stereo. just have it use all, use the DTS-X or Neural
like
X or whatever.
Output stereo so that you can use the upmixer.
Yeah, use the upmixer so that you know that every speaker is going to be getting some sound, because it's going to try.
Right.
It's going to try to put something into everything.
Yeah, no, honestly, I mean, this we're kind of joking about it a little bit, but genuinely, I think you will have a better chance of noticing a difference when you're switching back and forth between your two configurations if you're actually listening to content with the upmixer. I think you'll notice the surround backs more, because the upmixers put sound into the surround backs and they put sound into the overheads. Even if the discrete version of it didn't steer the sounds directly into those channels, the upmixer will put sounds in there. So genuinely, I think that's the better way.
Otherwise, you're going to have to listen to a movie, right? Or watch a movie, and there are large swaths of movies that don't have anything in the overheads or anything in the surround backs. So taking a stereo, and I said it jokingly, but the more I think about it, the more it makes sense. Taking a stereo music track and having it upmixed by one of your upmixers, then walking around to each of your speakers and but before you do any critical listening, walking around to each of your speakers, make sure they're all playing something, and then switch configurations and do it again, and make sure that the ones that aren't supposed to be playing aren't, and the ones that are actually giving you something. Then sit down and make sure so that way you're getting continuous sound through all these things. And then be prepared to be underwhelmed by your surround back speakers.
But
as according to Tom,
he's got everything on hand. It's not costing him any money. He's got the ability to do the two presets without destroying anything. I say this is great. This is a fun thing to do in your home theater.
Right. Brad has reached the point in his garage conversion that he's actually getting to watch some movies in there. Whee!
I mean, genuine congratulations, because
that's the fun part.
For the time that he's been talking to us, that's been a relatively short amount of time, but he came and talked to us because he's like, I had this idea. What was it, like 8 years ago?
It felt like it was longer than that, but yes, it's been a while. So we've helped him get to the point where he can actually use this thing. When we're showing some images of, is that The Witcher?
We've got The Witcher first, and then that's definitely, I'm pretty sure.
Eternals.
I'm pretty sure that's Eternals, That's it. Yeah, pretty darn sure. Second image.
With all the recent changes, he no longer had the budget to get a huge OLED, so rather than sacrifice on size, he went with a Sony LCD, and it still looks great. You know what it looks better than? Not having anything in there.
Yeah, sure looks better than a whole lot of nothing.
He's using a Denon S950H receiver for now that does not have HDMI 2.1, but he doesn't have a brand new gaming console yet anyways, and it tops out at 7 speakers total, so he went for a pair of front heights on his front wall. He made sure his Denon was set to enhanced for his HDMI ports, and also made sure that Sony's HDMI port is set to enhanced with Dolby Vision. He started with his Apple TV 4K, and it seemed to be having trouble passing Dolby Vision through his Denon to the Sony. Then he connected his Xbox One S, which supports Dolby Vision and Atmos, but it didn't give him all the green check marks. However, when he swapped some HDMI cables around, it turned out that the cable between his receiver and his TV must have been the problem. It was marked as high speed. Why didn't that work? It isn't super long, and since he'll be buying a new HDMI cable, does he need to worry about HDMI 2.1? I would 100%. If you're going to upgrade cables, get the one that does the fastest possible speed that you do not need right now, because it's not like they're insanely expensive.
No.
Like, it used to be.
They can be. You can still find insanely expensive ones, but it absolutely does not have to be.
Especially when you're not running
certified and everything.
You don't have a long run like you don't have a long run right now. I would just get the one that does all the speeds that it can do, because you can find the monoprice ones and some of the other ones that are just not that expensive.
Zeskit on Amazon, Rocketfish from Best Buy is fully certified. So yeah, I mean, at this point, I would just get an ultra high speed, because your TV can support it. So if and when you do get one of the brand new gaming systems, if and when you do get a new AV receiver that passes through 4K 120 and VRR and all the stuff that your TV supports, then you're not going to have to buy another HDMI cable. I mean, even though they're not crazy expensive,
going to save like
twice.
$200 or $300 on a cable, I would be like, yes, go ahead and get the cheaper cable. But we're talking about, I mean, I'm just guessing, $20-$30, maybe.
Not even that.
Maybe.
Not even that.
Maybe. You know, depending on the length of cable you're going with, I would just get the one that supports all the things for right now.
Look for certified. That means it's got a QR code and a hologram.
Hologram is what I'd be looking for.
And it should say ultra high speed. That is the only correct name for what people colloquially call HDMI 2.1 cables. There is no such thing as an HDMI 2.1 cable. Officially, there is no such thing. It is ultra high speed, and you want to look for the certified one. But like I said, Monoprice, Zeskit, Rocketfish. There are oodles of others, but those three are very, very simple to look for and inexpensive. So yeah, I would absolutely do that. Why did the cable that you already have that was marked as high speed not work? Well, it wasn't premium high speed. Premium high speed was the certified one. It's certified to pass 18 gigabits per second.
High speed
was high speed.
Is like when you ask for a hamburger done medium rare and they say, sure, we'll do that for you, and you're getting a hockey puck no matter what.
Right,
so
right.
That's what high speed means.
And it's why we like the certification, because in HDMI cables, the certification actually does count for something, because anyone can print the letters high speed on anything, and that means nothing, unfortunately. So yeah, the certification.
So he tried to play an Ultra HD Blu-ray using his Xbox One S. The movie played fine, but his info screens told him he was only getting HDR10 and multi-channel PCM audio. He's sure the disc itself was Dolby Vision and Atmos, so what's the deal? Okay, so Rob
Xbox as a player.
Let me tell you how much I love my Xbox Series X. I do. I mean, it's very convenient, and in most ways, I do like it. Mm-hmm. It's just how it handles all these things, especially the audio, that drives me up the wall. So I'll handle the audio. Okay. For the Xbox Series X and the Xbox X.
Yeah, this goes back to the One
Xbox
S,
One,
the One X, the Series S, and the Series X. This applies to all of them.
So there are two audio settings. Yeah. Okay.
In completely different parts of the menu.
Completely different parts of the menu. There's one that is for just the system itself, and that'll be gaming and streaming and everything else. And then there's one specifically for movies. So you have to set them both. Now, for a long time, for the movies, you could have it convert things and do the internal decoding and then send out PCM, which is what yours is doing. Yours is decoding it internally and then sending something out. So whatever the setting is, the default or whatever it had in there is what it's still set on. You need to go into the movie menu, wherever that is. I don't remember where it is, but it's in there. It's like, for movies.
Yeah, it's specifically labeled discs and Blu-rays, I think.
Yeah. You go into there, into the audio, and you want to select bitstream.
Well, the actual thing it says is, let my receiver decode audio. There's a check
That means bitstream.
I know, but if you're looking for the thing, it actually says the phrase, let my receiver decode audio. That is the phrase you're looking for.
That is what it'll say.
And it's not in the audio video settings. It's in the disc and Blu-ray settings.
That's right. So you got to go down there, and then you'll go back up to the audio video settings, and you can go into that audio menu, and it will have these. I think does the Xbox One also has all the options that the Series X has?
It does.
It does.
Yes,
okay, so it'll have like stereo,
uncompressed, will be
uncompressed. And then Atmos and DTSX. So you can have it do each of those things. Like, it will take all your audio and put it into that container, or you can select bitstream.
pass-through, bitstream pass-through
Yeah.
now. Because you got bitstream, and then bitstream can be Atmos all the time, DTSX all the time, or pass-through.
And let me tell you what my experience is with this.
And that's why he's like, I said it to Atmos, and what didn't even play Atmos from the disc. I'm like, yeah, because there's that separate disc and Blu-ray.
There's a separate disc. So in my system, if I select bitstream, it does all sorts of weird things, and it doesn't really, I never really know what I'm going to get, really. So I end up setting it to either Atmos or DTSX. Okay, but if I send it to DTSX, sometimes it won't play audio. Period, until I pause it and then change. I mean, I have to change something. It's almost like it didn't quite lock on.
Right.
Atmos works better for me than the DTSX does, except on Disney Plus, where sometimes it just doesn't play audio for, I don't know. No other app has that problem. I use YouTube, Twitch, Hulu, Netflix, Amazon Prime, and Disney Plus. Disney Plus is the only one where I can press play on something and it's going to be like, nah, you don't need no audio for this. So, yeah, it's not been great. I'll be honest with you. The audio's not been great, but it's from a disc. It's fine.
Yes.
You just select let my AV receiver do the decoding, and it will be fine. Yeah. That thing it does just fine. That
overrides the other audio video setting, as crazy as that is, when it's specifically playing a physical movie disc.
And we've talked about this before, but the reason why this is, the reason why they have this separate setting, and why it is that Xbox insists on having everything, it decodes it, then re-encodes it, and sends it out in whatever format you want it to be at, is so that the system settings, the system sounds, can override whatever, or be played at the same time as whatever else you're doing. Okay, and that's why they're hesitant and reluctant, and seem to be never. Because you've got to
get that notification chime.
That's right, and if not, then you would never get the notification chime, and they want you to get that. So they take all the audio that is going on, they decode it internally, then re-encode it into something else, and send it out, and that they do that so that they can do the system sounds at the same time as your game or your streaming service or whatever audio you're listening to.
As far as Dolby Vision from a movie disc, it's so ridiculous. I know the system supports Dolby Vision. It does it for the streaming services. It does it for games now. It doesn't do it for movie discs.
Yes.
It just doesn't support Dolby Vision from Blu-rays and Ultra HD Blu-rays. Just doesn't support Dolby Vision.
The PlayStation 5 does now, right? The PlayStation 5 does, but the Xbox doesn't.
Not Dolby Vision. The PlayStation 5 does not support Dolby Vision at all. It doesn't support it from streaming services. It doesn't support it from games. It doesn't support it from movies.
That's right. You're right.
So, I mean, at least the PlayStation 5 is easy. It doesn't support Dolby Vision. But the Xbox systems, they do support Dolby Vision for everything except movies.
Yeah. So that's recent. They just added that. So I know we wrote an article about it.
Streaming services, it's done it for quite a while on Xboxes. Yeah. Games is quite recent. They wasn't doing Dolby Vision games until quite recently. But movies, it just doesn't do it at all. So I know it's insane, but it just doesn't do it. So you did nothing wrong. Seeing HDR10 from your Ultra HD Blu-ray movie, yeah, that's what you're going to get from an Xbox. There is no way to get Dolby Vision from an Ultra HD Blu-ray to come out of your Xbox.
So he knows we just went over Dolby Vision Ultra HD Blu-ray players. In North America, the Panasonic UB820 is the only one that does everything correctly? ? That's dumb. Okay.
Yeah.
There's so much in this hobby, and believe me, it's a hobby that is dumb. Okay.
I mean, in a sense, at least there's one that does it correctly.
Right.
At least not zero.
Look at where we are with universal remotes right now. You think that's dumb? Harmony just disappeared.
We're waiting on those sofa batons. They said they'd start shipping. It hasn't happened yet.
No, I haven't gotten mine. So what do we think he should do? Well, I think he should buy the UB820. I mean, it does all the things. I mean, I know it's expensive, but I mean, for discs.
Yeah. I mean,
if you want Dolby Vision,
I don't know
what to tell you. I don't know what to tell you.
You could get the LG that handles Dolby Vision correctly but doesn't switch frame rates and has a lot of trouble playing 3-layer discs. Not a fantastic solution. You can get the Sonys where you have to manually put it into Dolby Vision mode, but also manually take it out of Dolby Vision mode. So, then you've got to manually check on a site like Next Gen Home Theater whether the disc is Dolby Vision or not. So to me, what I would do is wait for Black Friday when the UB820 is almost always on sale for under $400. And even though that's still more expensive, it's a little bit more palatable. And until then, I would continue using the Xbox. That's what I would do.
Yeah. You could buy a Lumagen. That's a reasonable thing to suggest that people do. That's what we do on this podcast all the time.
If you compare the UB820 to the Lumagen, you will say the UB820 is downright affordable.
Yes. Gav and Canberra. Last question here.
Okay.
First up, Gav says he really enjoyed our impromptu rant at the end of last episode. Very entertaining. What were we ranting about? I don't remember talking.
We got into all kinds of stuff about the like reviewing and
that.
Right. Everything last episode there.
So he's been using a 5.1 speaker package from Yamo for over 2 decades. The surround on the woofer of the Yamo subwoofer has deteriorated, so he raced out to buy a new subwoofer without really doing any research, which he never does, but this was an exception, which means you do it because you just did. He wound up being convinced by a local salesperson to go with the REL. Is REL the company I hate? It's not.
It sure is.
Is it really?
Yes, it is. It's the one.
Is this the one I hate?
You texted me about the one we
I
almost.
was so angry with this company, with their subwoofer break-in article that I wrote an article to talk about how subwoofer break-in is not a thing. You dummies. RELT/5i subwoofer, and was told that their connection system of using both speaker wire and RCA cable is better. What a load of horse manure. REL insists that the front left and right speakers must be set to large and that the subwoofer output should be set to LFE plus main. He's very happy with the results, but of course that runs counter to all the recommendations that recommendation that all speakers, even towers, be set to small. He would just like to better understand REL's configuration. Can we elaborate? It's dumb. That's what it is. It's dumb configuration.
I kind of know the path that brought them here, like the historical path of how they wound up here. I can sort of see the logical progression.
It's a very, very old, thought process is what it is.
That's right.
Where, your bass should be coming from the same place as the rest of your sounds. And therefore you should co-locate everything. And for a long time, and I mean, I've been doing this podcast long enough that you can find my voice giving this recommendation. And it was wrong then, but we did not know it because this was the general state of science.
Right.
And that's what it comes down to. And this is the thing that irritates me more than anything. Science, as we progress throughout history, improves. It looks at what we have done in the past and says, is this true? Let me
question
see
everything.
Whether or not
Experiment.
Whether or not this is true. And, people will say, the general, and I see this all the time on online forums and recommendations. People will say, you need to do this with your speakers. And no one ever asks the person, how does it sound first? They never say, does it sound like this? Because if so, you should move your speakers like that or anything else. But people were constantly saying you need to put your subwoofers underneath your speakers or right next to your front speakers because that's where the sound is coming from. But then no one ever said, how does it sound? Because people would say, I did that and it sounds kind of weird or not great. Or, is this how it's supposed to sound?
Or really different from seat to seat.
Right. And it wasn't until somebody took a look at it, obviously Dr. Floyd Toole and Sean and all those people.
Sean Olive and Todd Welty.
Olive, yes. Yep. Yeah, until they did that, no one questioned it because we had no other data out there. But we do now. So REL can suck it because they have not looked at the data that literally exists out there for this exact purpose. It's ridiculous that they have not done this. And I mean,
it's actually even kind of like counter because what we've arrived at is if you want good uniformity and linearity, you need more than one subwoofer. 2 can get you the lion's share of what you need. 4 is technically even better, but 2 could get even better. REL is selling subwoofers. Don't they want the information that says, hey, it's better to have 2?
They have pictures on their website of 4 subs stacked on top of each other in 2 stacks directly next to front, left, and right speakers.
Of course, yeah.
I'm like, why? Why? Now, okay, part of the problem, and I've said this many times before in this podcast, it is photography. Okay. You cannot.
Well, yeah.
You cannot take a picture of 2 subwoofers properly placed because they're not next to each other.
They're on opposite sides of the room. So I mean, you could do a split screen photo, but that doesn't look that great on a magazine cover.
You see these SVS glamour shots, and it's front, left, and right speakers with 2 subs, on the insides of them, right flanking the TV and the center speaker. And it looks great on the picture.
It's symmetrical. It's pretty.
Yeah, it's just not the way it works. So this idea that you run everything full range, the speakers play the bass because they're full range, which your speakers are not. And when I say your speakers, I mean everyone listening to this podcast.
But I mean, particularly Gav's speakers, he's talking about a 5.1 Yamo speaker package. Those front speakers are definitely not genuinely full range. And then even if they were, and they actually could play down to 20 hertz, you wouldn't want them to because they're not in good locations to do that. Yeah. But understanding how REL arrived at this, historically, I can see the progression because there was easily a time when what we had were stereo receivers, stereo integrated amps, or stereo setups. We just had left and right, and those were full range signals. And when you tried to incorporate a subwoofer, what you had to do was send the same signal that was going to the speakers also to the subwoofer. That was the only way to get the signal to the subwoofer. There was no dedicated subwoofer output. When we started getting the first dedicated subwoofer outputs, very often it was just the same signal that was going to the front, left, right. Again, a full range signal, but just as a line out signal. Often the subwoofer output, the first ones, the early ones that first existed, were just a summed signal. It was a mono summed signal of the front, left, and right. And when you sent that by itself to the subwoofer, and then also had the front, left, rights, still just getting the full range signal, and we didn't have any of this crossover stuff worked out just yet, it was difficult to integrate the two things together. So when they're saying, oh, we've mastered the integration of your full range speakers with our subwoofers, all they do is have a crossover dial on the subwoofer. This is not a new and amazing innovation, but they're still talking about it as though it is because they're stuck in the past when it was an innovation at one point.
They're also targeting a more audiophile crowd too, who wants this sort of thing, and they want people to tell them that their speakers should be run full range because they believe that their speakers should be run full range. So they don't want to listen to. They don't want SVS to tell them you should cross over your tower speakers into our subwoofers because that's how they'll sound best. They want somebody to tell them, no, you should run your towers full range, and then we'll also augment that with
yes, they love that. We'll augment.
So in theory, there's nothing wrong with your sub. I do not like the company. That doesn't mean that they necessarily make bad subs. I don't really know. I haven't heard them, but I'm sure they're fine. But you just set them up the way we say. Right. Just ignore all that. If you can take it back, I would.
I mean, he said it was actually more than he wanted to pay. I would consider.
I mean, I think if you can buy an SVS for less, I would do that because we're gonna tell you to set it up the same way that you should that you're gonna set up the SVS or anything else, which is just crossover. Speaker set to small, send a single, RCA cable from your subwoofer output to your subwoofer input, defeat the crossover in your subwoofer. Which is apparently still a thing people do not believe because there's people arguing with me on Reddit right now about whether or not they should use the subwoofer crossover on their sub.
I'm like, the REL doesn't have a defeat the crossover setting because this
just set it as high as possible.
This is what they want you to do. The other bit on what the REL configuration to understand what they're talking about, we've started with this. It's getting the speaker level one, and then it has its own crossover knob. That's their great innovation. But then their other great innovation is that, of course, time has progressed. We now have discrete subwoofer signals, and we also have the dedicated low frequency effects channel, the LFE channel. And so what they are touting in their setup is that, typically it's one or the other, right? Typically you either get the full range signal that's sent to both the speakers and the subwoofer together, or you get the dedicated subwoofer output, or just the low frequency effects channel by itself. We do both. And I'm sure that was the sales pitch, because that's always the sales pitch with REL, is that we do both. You can have the full range signal from the speakers like you're used to in your stereo setup from 1980, and then we can also bring in that dedicated low frequency effects channel. Unlike other subs where you only get one or the other, we do both. You just today, with a modern AV receiver that has proper crossovers and handles the bass management correctly, because I will agree, that was not always the case. There was a time when bass management was a new thing and was not always handled correctly. But on a modern AV receiver, bass management is handled correctly. Just set all the speakers, all of them, to small, have the subwoofer output set to subwoofer, not sub plus main, and set your crossover at an appropriate amount, which is probably 80 hertz. Maybe if your speakers are small, it might be 100 or 120. Like, I'm talking physically, genuinely small, can't play below 100 or 120 hertz. Maybe that's where the crossover will be set. So that's where we end up landing. And
the science backs us up.
If you can exchange that REL, I very well might.
If it's more than you wanted to pay. Now, if it was in your budget, I would say, I would look at the specs first before I which I'm not going to do. But I would look at the specs first and then tell you whether or not I would tell you whether or not I thought. If it doesn't hit down to 20 hertz,
it does not. It definitely does not.
Now, I would take it back. Take it back. And I don't blame the salesperson. They may be either misinformed or just working on commission. That's not their fault. That's the nature of the business. But I would get the subwoofer that gets to 20 hertz that costs either the same or less, and place it properly and save up for the second one. I know how things work in Australia a little bit. So and there's it's a little bit of a different atmosphere, and as far as how, like, even furniture over there is a different shape and size than what we have here in the States. So there are some differences. Yeah. And housing, too, can also be laid out quite a bit differently than what I've experienced here in the States. So there are differences, but bass doesn't care what country you're in, and it will work the same. Our recommendations are based on the current science. Now, if 10 years from now, you're still listening to this podcast and we're still doing this podcast somehow, I will, and science has changed, I will change my recommendations. I will not still be the REL of podcasting. It will change because I have changed before and I will continue to change. So where they are and who they're selling to, you're not that guy. You're listening to this podcast. You're the guy who wants the best bass that's the most uniform across your entire system. And this is not how they get it. Your speakers, and again, I know your speakers are not full range, but I feel very confident in saying no one listening to this podcast has full range speakers, because full range speakers that actually legitimately play flat at a reference level from a normal seating distance down to 20 hertz are so insanely expensive. None of you own them. None of you do. Okay, so. Hey, all the Def Tech owners are like, wait a second, I've got subs inside my... Shut up. Just shut up.
I will say this. It is Australia. Definitely prices are higher. SVS prices are higher, so that might be out of the range. But I will say, barring that, Klipsch tends to be a bit more affordable. And Klipsch's subwoofers, like one of the 12-inch models from Klipsch, pretty darn reasonable. Maybe it's not genuinely flat down to 20 hertz, but it's no slouch. It's no slouch. And compared to, what you're comparing it to, that would be a very reasonable choice. So that just something to consider.
And probably quite a bit less. So who do we have left?
We have Justin and Eric on the list for next week.
All right. We want to thank Gav for going to avrant.com and being a listener of the week by clicking on the Buy Us a Cup of Coffee link, as well as our 136 patrons over at patreon.com, including Bertrand and Todd.
Yes, indeed. Gav, thank you so much for the PayPal donation. Hope you enjoyed our answer, even though maybe not, because it's like, the thing I just bought. You just told me not. But anyway, that's what you're going to get. That's
it was an impulse buy. That's on you, buddy. We
And,
want to thank Jake.
So I just want to say patreon.com/AVRant Podcast to sign up for an automatic monthly donation. Big thanks to our 136 patrons, Bertrand and Todd. Thank you for being two of them.
So thank JT for sending us Movies Anywhere code, as well as the notes of gratitude from Brandon, 2A, JR, Aras, Gurinder, Bertrand, Brad, Gav, and Justin. So thank you very much for thanking us and for JT.
You betcha, JT. Thanks so much for the Movies Anywhere code that Tom can make use of. And Brandon, 2A, JR, Aras, Gurinder, Bertrand, Brad, Gav, and Justin greatly appreciate the notes of gratitude to us for keeping the podcast going. The notes of encouragement are definitely appreciated. And a big thank you to everybody who continues to listen and send in your questions.
Yeah, to get your question answered, all you have to do is ask. You ask by emailing us at question@avrant.com. For AVRant, I'm Tom Andrew.
And I'm Rob H. Now stay in and listen to something.
Want your question answered? Send it to question@avrant.com. This is AVRant.
Now go out and listen to something.